Hey guys, welcome to the Linux course. In this session, we'll be looking at the basics of the kernel. So let's get started. Okay, so first, a Linux kernel is a Unix-like operating system kernel. So again, as Linux is a Unix-like operating system, obviously the kernel of Linux will be a Unix-like kernel. So it is a computer program which is the core interface which connects the hardware components to the software processes. So the software processes which you are trying to establish or trying to interpret is basically you're typing in the command on the shell and hitting enter. So you will know this part. Basically you will know the application part where you are typing in the command and then you do not know what happens in the back. It just you get the result. So what happens is whenever you type in a command, you have the kernel in the middle. A kernel is basically a very huge program. It's a very huge program right now. I think it's standing up at 2 million lines of code. So it is a very complicated program, and so a kernel, as it's complicated, it is also that helpful. So a kernel is the main interconnection between the software application or the software processes and the hardware components. So let's say if you're trying to find out how much RAM your system is currently using. So you cannot directly go and check the RAM in your system. You need a process running in the background which basically connects to the hardware components and checks how much RAM is being used and sends that information back to you. So that is what the kernel does. So kernel does all kinds of operations that we'll see now. So the top operations performed by a kernel. First, resource management, and then memory management, and then device management, and finally system calls. Okay, now let us get a brief about each of those operations. First, resource management. So kernel decides which process gets a resource for an operation. So let's say you are running multiple processes parallelly. Say in that multiple processes, two processes need the same resource for an operation. So right now the kernel will decide which operation should use that resource first, or which should use it second, because it should not end up in a deadlock situation. So to avoid that, kernel performs an operation which basically chooses which exactly needs the resource right now, or it may delay the process of execution. So it might give it to a process which takes lesser time first, and then it gives it to a process which takes a longer time. So the resource management, there are varieties, but this is one of the main operations which the kernel does. Second one is memory management. Memory management is very important for any server, for any computer. Even in your Windows system, you have 1 TB of space, and even then memory management is very important because memory management is taken care by your system, your operating system Windows, and it takes care of it well. So like that, kernel takes care of memory management as well. Kernel has complete access to the system memory and must efficiently manage it and allow memory access to process. So why do you need memory exactly is memory is not for storing content. Memory is to run processes efficiently and effectively. So the kernel should know how much memory should be allocated to each processes so that your system is not completely taken away of free memory. So let's say you have 100 MB of memory and there are 10 processes. Your kernel should decide how much memory does each process deserve to use. So it should provide that efficiently. And then device management. So device management, it's pretty common in every single operating system. So basically, if you're using a Windows system, if you just enter a pen drive, you'll be seeing that in your My Computer or this PC software. So like that, device management is also taken care by kernel. So if we connect devices as a printer or a pen drive, so the kernel will detect it and the system will establish connections with the peripherals. So if I connect in a pen drive, so this particular system, my operating system, should detect whether I've connected a pen drive or not. If it does not detect, then there is no use of a USB port in your computer. So the kernel will detect it, and there is a separate directory in kernel which is known as /dev, DEV. So that particular directory is is specially maintained for device management. So any device entering into this particular Linux operating system or any Linux operating system will have a separate directory for them in the so if I enter a pen drive, that pen drive will have a separate directory within that /dev directory. So Linux kernel also takes care of device management. And finally, system calls. System calls, this is one of the important concepts, and this is an interface between a process and the operating system. When the process does not have permissions to access a resource, a system call provides it without the process accessing the resource directly. So basically, let's say you're running a process, but you've not given the process enough permissions to use a particular resource. So you can use system calls for that process. You can embed system calls in your shell script or in your code. So that when that particular system call is used, your process will be given access to that resource indirectly using system calls. So that is the purpose of system calls itself, to not stop the process from running. It does not interrupt your execution. It helps your execution to complete as fast as possible. For that, you can use system calls, and also you can use system calls to basically do more operations on the operating system level. So let's say you want to abort a particular process immediately. You can use a system call for that. So there are various system calls. These are the 4 important operations performed by a kernel. So we'll be saying this later in this course. So you'll have to just assume that kernel is you don't need to assume actually, you'll have to understand that kernel is the main component of any Linux distribution, and kernel manages all of the top operations of a Linux distribution. So going ahead, so right now we've completed the part that is basics of kernel. So meet you in the next session where we'll be doing a hands-on for installing operating system CentOS on the VirtualBox. So thank you.